Charles saying the launch is now live.
I haven't gone live on my side. There we go. Now we're live. So good afternoon, good evening, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, RISE community, supporters, volunteers, depending on which part of the world you are joining us from on this beautiful Sunday. Welcome to the official launch of RM Global. Just a year after the launch of Rise Mzansi, we are now going global to mobilize South Africans across our borders who also want to build a safe, prosperous, equal, and united South Africa in one generation. My name is Dimpho Lekgeo. I am the community manager at Rise Mzansi, and I'm going to be moderating today's launch. I am joined by Professor Nick Binedell, who is the Rise Mzansi Business Sector Coordinator. I'm also joined by Tebogo Moalusi, who is the Rise Mzansi Provincial Convenor. Now, just before we get started and I hand over to them really, according to Business Tech, there's about over 900,000 South Africans who are living abroad. And that means that there's a lot of potential to mobilize South Africans who may not be living in the country, but as I mentioned earlier, who share a similar vision to that of Rise Mzansi, who want to someday return to a country that works for all of us, a country that we deserve, that is safe, that is prosperous, that is equal and united. Voting for South Africans living abroad kicks off on the 18th of May. So that's in just under 2 weeks. And so we wanted to launch RM Global so that South Africans who are living abroad, but who are interested in getting to know more about Rise Mzansi, have the platform to do so, but to also encourage registered voters abroad to cast their votes wherever they may be in the world. So before I hand over the reins once again, a reminder to please engage with us in the chat. Personally, I would like everyone to introduce themselves. Let us know where in the world you are based. And feel free to ask any questions or make contributions. We will have space for a Q&A session later on in our engagement. But as I mentioned, I'm not alone, and I'm joined by the real drivers of today's session. So I'm going to call on Tebogo Moalusi, our provincial convener in Gauteng, who is going to really paint a picture of who Rise Mzansi is and what we're all about. Debza, over to you.
Thank you, Dimpo, and good afternoon to you all. If I'm audible, if you can just put a thumbs up just so that I can continue. Thank you. Good afternoon, Dumelang. I hope you are all well. I'm calling you from Tshwane at the moment. We are on the road trying to make sure that the last 24 days of this very important campaign really are a success. We have been on this journey for over a year now, and the last 20 days really are where it comes together. As introduced, my name is Tebogo Moalusi. I am the Gauteng Provincial Convenor, but I also sit on what we call the National Leadership Collective, which essentially is the executive structure that coordinates the functions and the operations of Rise Mzansi. What a pleasure to be with you all from all over the world. A part of me is a little bit jealous because I'd love to be traveling. I'd love to be another part of the world, just enjoying different cultures. And I hope wherever you are safe, you're comfortable, and that you have some joy in your heart. I must say, here in South Africa, we are 24 days away from the elections. There's definitely an energy about the competition to win the hearts and minds of South Africans is definitely on. And as Rise Mzansi, like I said, we started this really on the 19th of April, 2023, where we let the world know that we were becoming intentional about wanting to contest for political power and influence. And that was born out of a nationwide interaction with communities where, above many things, it was also realized that being a participant in the political realm was important. We have many platforms which we can be activists, from civil society to business to faith-based organizations. But it was important that we created a vehicle like Rise Mzansi in order to contest for power, so that we can realize and contest for some of the things that we want to see in the country that we deserve. So 19th April 2023, we had an event at Constitutional Hill where we made our intentions, very clear. And I think Gimpo has spoken about our vision statement, but I think it's important that I take you through that in a very slow way, because it anchors us in our reason for being. So our vision statement really is that we want to build the South Africa that we deserve. And it's important to note that we believe that there is another version of South Africa that we're not realizing, and that the past few years, whilst many of us have been able to benefit from having the opportunity of work and building a level of livelihood, many of us have lived and experienced the fringes of what democratic and constitutional outcomes and dividends are. And so the South Africa we deserve has to then mean something. And for us, it must be safe. We have for many years we have never felt this unsafe. Whether you live in the township, whether you live in rural areas, whether you live in suburban areas, we feel unsafe. And that level of unsafety is more felt by particularly people who are women, people who are youth, people who are living with disabilities. And so it is very important that we solve for safety as part of our journey of building this. The second was around telling the world that we want prosperity. Any adult wants to wake up and have a sense of purpose and make a contribution and build value and extract value, which it defines success for us in different ways. And so prosperity is a very important one for us in the different forms. And then the third element of our vision statement is equality. We know the country that we live in. We know our history. We know how violent and systemic oppression and what apartheid did to many people around this country. And so when we talk about fairness, when we talk about justice, when we talk about freedom, it must be within the context of understanding where this country comes from, but also what does this country then build itself up to be for the next 30 years. The fourth component, or the fourth element, is about unity. We want to build a united South Africa. We believe that the factional and fractional politics have divided us and given us a reason to identify ourselves as others. And we believe that we are better and stronger when we are together. And so building a united South Africa is about compassion, is about a caring politics that galvanizes all of us to bind together behind this vision statement. And so that safe, that prosperous and equal and united South Africa becomes the bedrock of our vision statement. And then we qualify that by saying we want to do it in one generation. The fact that so many people in South Africa have not been able to realize the freedoms that are entrenched and inculcated in the Constitution of South Africa, particularly the preamble and the Bill of Rights, means that we have a lot of work to do. 30 years later, not yet Uhuru. There's just far too many people who live in poverty, who are unemployed, who live in indignity, and deserve the very best leaders to fight for them to realize the promises that are said in the Constitution of South Africa. And so that then formulates our vision statement. We want to live and achieve the South Africa we deserve, which is safe, which is prosperous, which is equal and united in one generation. That's what we shared on the 19th of April. We then went on a countrywide listening experience because we didn't feel we had enough knowledge to be able to come up with what we will call today a manifesto. And so we went on a listening politics adventure, and we heard many things that are disturbing, because obviously the name of the country is deeply problematic. And so we went to town halls, we sat in street meetings, in huddles, in roundtable discussions, talking about possible policy discussions and opportunities. And we extracted and listened to what South Africans want. A few months later in October, we hosted what was called the Rise Mzansi People's Convention, And that was when we brought together all that thinking and all those contributions to formulate what was called the People's Declaration. All of these documents and this experience are on our website, so you are able to follow our genesis and our journey as I talk about it. So the People's Declaration essentially is the Freedom Charter 2.0. It is a document, it's a proclamation, it's a promise of what we would like to build as a country under the leadership of Rise Mzansi, not only in politics, but in all aspects of society. After that, we went further to listen and to validate what came out of the People's Declaration, and we then came up with what was the People's Manifesto. The People's Manifesto touches on many aspects, some of them including the reason why we are here in the first place, which is we need new leaders. We need new leaders. Our proposition as Rise Mzansi is the fact that the political leadership of this country does not care, it's corrupt, it's inept, and does not reflect the country that we need to be able to build in the next 30 years. And so we need new leaders is the premise that defines this particular election and the next 5 years of what our proposition is. We then go into a very important part, which is the economy and jobs. I think if you live in South Africa, you know that too many people are unemployed and too many people live in poverty. And so we had to respond to the question of how are we going to create jobs? How are we going to grow the economy? How are we going to be globally competitive in order to build a country that is successful and prosperous, like I said before? We then talk about safety and crime because, like I said, people feel unsafe today and they have been feeling that unsafe for decades. And so we talk about safety, not only in a reactive sense, but also in a proactive sense, talking about what are some of the interventions we put in place to respond to issues of safety and to deal with the issues of crime in our communities and in our country at large. We then talk about a very important part, which is basic services. Every single home and every single business resides in a local municipality. And for as long as we are not able to respond to fixing our local government, we will not respond to the challenges of the everyday life. That talks about refuse, it talks about roads, it talks about water, it talks about electricity, it talks about the basic things that make a community and a family function. And so we must be able to fix and solve for that. We then talk about a very important thing, which is climate change and the climate crisis that we find ourselves in. We only have one world. And so if we're not able to deal and respond to some of the challenges that speak to the global climate crisis, then we've got a big problem. And it's not just in the big conversations of, transitioning from coal to renewables, but how does climate change affect the citizens of this country on a daily basis? From homes being washed down by floods in KZN, right down to the Eastern Cape, where crop yields have diminished incredibly and has led to hunger. We have to be able to respond to climate change in a pragmatic way and in a language that responds and communicates and connects with people in the communities that we come from. We also talk about food and food hunger that we experience in this country. Far too many people go to bed hungry and not understanding or knowing where their next meal is going to come from. And so, whilst we might have very big plans of solving for some of the most complex problems, we need to deal with some of the basics. And solving for food hunger is one of the priorities of Rise Mzansi. There's many more and much more that I could share with you, but I think for the purposes of this launch, and I think we must celebrate this moment, by the way, whilst we are having an engagement, I think this is also a celebration that says we are building a community of people that is behind Rise Mzansi, that wants to see a better South Africa that can contribute to the world. Where are we today? We are 24 days away from the elections. Some of you are even closer because you'll be voting overseas. We've got structures all over the country. We have built what we call the National Leadership Collective, of which myself and Prof Nick are part of. It's led by our leader, who is Songezo Zibi. Songezo Zibi comes from the Eastern Cape and through life has worked in both corporate and civil service and, has been an activist as part of a think tank called Rivonia Circle, that was then the platform that birthed Rise Mzansi. We've got various premier candidates in Gauteng, in KZN, and in the Western Cape, and you can read a bit about their profiles and what we have to offer in those different provinces. So what's important to note is that we are contesting all 9 provincial ballots, and we will also be contesting for national. We had to reach a specific threshold in order to do that, which was 65,000 signatures that we had to get from registered voters. Rise Mzansi managed to get over 112,000 signatures in order to be eligible to contest in all 9 provinces as well as national, which speaks to the organization and the foot soldiers and communities that we have built in order to have made that happen within a 3-week period. We are very proud of that, and we want to thank our volunteers and our field organizers all over the country who made that happen. Over the next few days, we will be running various programs around the country, conscientizing and building awareness around Rise Mzansi and its proposition. We've got 2 different documents that we speak to. It's the People's Manifesto, and in each of the big provinces, which are Gauteng, Western Cape, and KZN, we've got actual plans that talk to a much more deeper and more defined approach to what it is that we want to do in those spaces. We took that approach because we needed to be data-driven, we needed to be targeted, and we needed to be strategic about where we think we can get the biggest impact based on the different trends that we have analyzed as an organization. We are a thinking organization, we're a data-driven organization, we're a scientific organization, but at the same time, we exercise empathy, compassion, and emotion because we believe that that's what has been taken out of politics. As I close and hand over to Prof. Nick, I just want to continue to invite you to build this community with us. This is not just about the 2024 elections. It is about building an organization, building a movement of people that will become the center of South African society. Rise Mzansi must be the intellectual, political, moral, and ethical center that binds South African people and moves us forward. And so our mission is a 20-year mission. And whilst we've got 2024, 2026, and 2029, which are milestone elections that will get us there, it's very important that we realize that this is not just about elections, but about defining a way of life that everybody can contribute towards. So on that part, I just want to thank you for joining us on the celebratory note of launching our global community. May you interact and connect with us. I hope that wherever you are, this call makes you connected and feel connected to South Africa, a beautiful country that has just been let down by poor leaders who have not seen our value as a people. And we are about to change that through our vote, but also through our contribution from South Africa and the world at large. Thank you very much. I'll hand over back to yourself. I'm not seeing Dimple, but perhaps Prof. Nick, you might want to come in at this stage. Thank you, everyone, and what a pleasure to connect with you all.
I'm still here, Tebza. And thank you very much for that just comprehensive breakdown of who Rise Mzansi is and what our offering to the people of South Africa is, and not just the people who are living within South Africa, but of course our global community as well. And you mentioned something so important about plugging into the community and plugging into the work that the organization is already doing. And there are several ways to do that as a South African living abroad. So we obviously have the RM Global Facebook group that you can be a part of, but we also have a WhatsApp group where you can interact with us and our leaders, I think, just more intimately. We share updates daily on what's happening within the Rise Mzansi campaign. We share our activities, but we're also very open to some of your suggestions as to how we can reach those South Africans who are living outside of the country. Before I hand over to Prof. Nick, just a reminder that this is not a one-way conversation. We're not just here to give you presentations. We absolutely want you to engage with us. So do send us your questions, your contributions, or if not, just let us know who you are, where you are in the world. And I think maybe, and this is a question I asked Prof. Nick last week because he's an avid traveler. What are some of the things you miss the most when you are outside of South Africa? We absolutely would like to get to know you better. But now I'm going to call on Prof. Nick, who is ready. I see he's already unmuted. And he is going to paint a picture of the state of South Africa right now and why we all need to be a part of this urgent collective action that is needed to change the trajectory of our country. And so, Prof. Nick, good afternoon, and the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Dimpo, and Tebogo, thanks for a great start. You focused on RISE. I'm going to go a little beyond RISE and talk about the country a bit more. But firstly, let me say hello to everybody. It's fantastic to be with you. There is so much going on. I'm sure you can feel, if through family and friends, the tension and the build-up. We've been working very hard for actually much longer than just the launch of the party a year ago. So this team of many hundreds of people are spread all around the country. They're all today having meetings every day, 7 days a week. And I'm very proud to have joined this exceptional group. The National Leadership Collective is about 25 of us. As you can probably tell, I'm a slightly different generation. I've watched South African politics and been engaged in it for many years. You may know of me through the building of Gibbs, which I started in January of 2000. I'm no longer the head of it, so I'm free to do this work and feel very privileged to join an exceptional group of committed professionals. One of the things about the leadership team in RISE is only one or two come from a structured political background. They've had a lot of professional experience, a deep passion and care for the country, and it's just been amazing to work with people from all over the country, full of energy, ready to bring new leaders. And I think that's such a big theme for RISE Mzansi, is new leaders to make a difference to our politics, which seem to be so out of line with the needs of South Africans. So firstly, greetings wherever you are in the world. I've done what all of you have done. I lived in the States for 4 years, the UK for 2, and it's always such a paradox connecting with Mzansi, with home, because you have your life wherever you are. You may be studying, you may be doing an assignment, you maybe have moved, but you still got this vital heart and brain-led connection. It's an umbilical cord that never breaks, and if you connect with that thought, I certainly can connect with you, having done it. I remember when I was living in America, getting so homesick, long before the internet and email, I wrote to the staff for a boerewors recipe. They never were nice enough to send it to me, but we can miss our homeland, and it's great to have you. You may just be curious about RISE. You may already be a supporter. It doesn't really matter. So let me start by saying there's an exam coming up. I'm a professor. There are exams, and the exams is on the 29th of May. Not for all of you. Yours is earlier. But we can feel the tension. The poster war has happened. The campaigns are underway. There's a lot of mudslinging, a lot of disinformation. But RISE has really struck me as an organization of great integrity. And I just urge you to do what Dimpo is suggesting. Just get connected to the general media. There's so much material there for you to get familiar with the substance of the party, which can never be communicated in a call like this. Although obviously we can tell you about what we're up to. All the polls are predicting roughly a similar thing. The ANC at 45%, and then you can work your way through. And it's very hard to tell, because when people get into the line, I've been in the line, not sure who to vote for. But RISE presents a new platform and a new organization. And what so impressed me has been being so national as it has. I've been campaigning in KZN, in Howick, in Montclair, in KwaMashu. I've been to Khayelitsha and Manenberg and Walmer, just working door to door, house meetings, town hall meetings, and attracting to RISE the kind of caliber of people that we've been so fortunate to do. As you all know, South Africa's in a very challenging time. We're not alone. You probably have heard many times already that there are 4 billion people will vote this year, the biggest, of course, being India. But we're part of that story of embedding democracy and creating a new vision that goes beyond the leaders that have got us to where we are. They certainly brought about our freedom, but in the last 10 years particularly have been unable to make, as Tebogo said, our real dreams come true. And I've been into so many homes where I've seen poverty and suffering and jobless people and tension in communities as we really are struggling. As you probably know, there's not much growth in the economy at the moment. I've always said that economic growth is the oxygen of democracy, because if you don't have economic growth, you can't continue the program of transformation. And the government has borrowed everything that they can within reason. And you know, we've had these huge challenges with state-owned enterprises. The biggest one we've all felt, of course, is Eskom. But there's 600 of these things, and we just hear about the big ones. Almost all of them are underperforming, if not worse than that. So these are man-made problems, bad legislation, bad governance, let alone corruption, just incompetence and the lack of willingness to connect the dots and get the jobs done. Most of our big inner cities are under terrible stress and are declining. These are all man-made problems. South Africa has been blessed with incredible assets. Apart from its just natural beauty, which I'm sure you all miss, there's the infrastructure of South Africa, which is way ahead of many countries that I would have studied 10 years ago. We were way ahead. Now we're barely keeping up. And our infrastructure, as you probably all know, is declining. We're not investing. But we do have a very strong private sector. We have an amazing set of companies and institutions, the Chapter 9 institutions, the legal system, the free media. And this will be a free, fair election, which is really quite extraordinary. At least I am confident of that. So it's an open democracy, which is a huge feature in the world, which you at a distance must help us who are here protect. And so I would argue that our first duty as citizens is to make sure we vote. But as Tebogo said, voting is just one methodology of being a Democrat. It's really what support we give to communities and to organizations in between, holding leaders to account, which we've really failed to do. If you follow closely South African news, you will know that the MK party is a new phenomenon since December, and that Jacob Zuma, past President Jacob Zuma, is the leader of this party. And the ANC decided to discipline him. Then it decided not to, so he claims he's a member of both. And then it decided it was going to, and today it announced again, this is the fourth change of mind, that it's not going to. Why? It's not a matter of principle. It's purely a matter of politics, that people are concerned about the impact of running that disciplinary process. It's that kind of bad, unprincipled leadership that puts South Africa at risk. And every vote that is given towards changing that picture is a constructive vote. Now, as you know, RISE is a new party, and there are a number of new parties, but I'd like to just briefly say to you, it's hard for you to get a feel of how big RISE is. And maybe if you go on the website, you'll see some of the visuals. You'll see how many volunteers we've got, field organizers. As Tebogo said, we're in every province. I think about it as follows. You'll have 3 ballots, a national ballot, and then the second new ballot, and then the provincial ballot. And you may choose differently to vote differently. That I understand. I live in Cape Town. I know many DA voters want to keep happening what's happening here, although it's a bit under threat. But that's fine. We hope you'd vote for RISE Mzansi. And it's attracted a lot of interest all in Cape Town, but all around the country. But you may consider an investment vote to think about the quality of the leadership of people like Songezo, Vuyiswa Ramakgopa, who's our chair, Silna Steyn, who's our deputy chair, provincial leaders like Tebogo, who are in the senior leadership of RISE. We've got some very talented youth organizers, community organizers that are really exceptional South Africans that I feel very, very proud to be working with. And the numbers are coming through. We've got, as Tebogo said, about 3 more weeks to go for South African vote, and you've not got long before you have to get into the booth if you can get yourself to an electoral booth. We would encourage you to tell people about RISE, and for yourself to perhaps hook up and to be a volunteer and get to be familiar with our policies and our people. Songezo Zibi is an outstanding South African. You know, I'm of an age and running business schools where I've met many, many leaders, not just in business, but in civil society and elsewhere. And he and the people around him are exceptional. And I hope you get to know them and watch the video clips and see the social media. We're not promising immediate results. As we've said in RISE, it will take a generation to fix the damage that's been done. I'll just give you one example before I begin to wrap up, is the education system, which we don't talk about much, but is probably the most damaging factor in terms of South Africa's ability to function as an economy. It's a disgrace of an education system. About 1 million people every year leave school, and I'm not sure how many of them are truly employable in the 21st century modern economy. That's a tremendous challenge. The same is true for healthcare and for social services. And as we all know, the infrastructure of public roads and city roads and rail and ports. These are challenges, but they've been made by us, and they can be unmade by us. And they can be made if the kind of leaders in RISE are given your active electoral support to make your vote count for the future. Because RISE is a leadership group of younger people, professionals all, but younger. It's a different generation. And it's time to take the mantle from those who have been around for 20, 30 years. I just look at the leadership of the ANC. I know those people because I worked with them in the 80s when I was in the UDF, and they're still in charge of this country. They're in their 70s or older. And it's time that a younger generation comes to the fore. The ANC does not have that generation. So it's very, very important that wherever you are in the world, that you think through those things and hopefully make a choice to share some of your democratic rights by voting for RISE Mzansi. I think let me end there, and let's take some questions and discussion. But think about what I'm saying as using this as one of the many forms we have as Democrats to shape the future of this beloved, beloved country where so much has been paid for to give us what we have. I'm a constitutional Democrat. I'll never move away from that. And RISE Mzansi, for me at least, has been so appealing, such great people to work with as we plow our way into the future, 2026 and 2029. And we're not going away. We are rising. So thank you, Dimple, for giving me the opportunity to share those thoughts.
Indeed, we're not going away. We're here to stay. We're here to build a safe, equal, prosperous, equal, and united South Africa in one generation. And that means that a child who is born in 2024, in the next 20 years, needs to experience the kind of South Africa that we're talking about, the kind of South Africa that Tebogo described when he spoke about some of the things that we want to see together with the South Africans that we consulted on that listening politics adventure. And that is a society, like Prof is mentioning, where people can access good healthcare, where people don't have to travel to get a quality education. You mentioned, Prof, that you're incredibly passionate about the education system. And one of the core reasons why South Africans live abroad is to get an education. And we should work towards building the kind of quality education system where people are able to stay here at home and do their postgraduate degrees at home and still be able to be globally competitive. But we have quite a few comments that have come in the chat. So I'd just like for us to engage those before I move on to the more official questions. There's a comment from Sharon Lee Warren McDaniel, who says, "Hi, I'm from Detroit in the US. Thank you all to Rise for what you are doing. I will be flying to Washington, DC to vote on the 18th. Great stuff, Sharon Lee." And then Kim Herber Percy says, "Such a positive and interesting party, going to vote in Paris on the 18th. So we have the US and a bit of Europe in the comments. H just commenting, I think, to what you alluded to, Prof, that we spend a fifth of our national budget on education. And it's quite scary when you think about the output versus the investment. But to our first question, Jordan Binedell says, "Hi, Jordan from London. How does RISE plan on tackling mid-level and local corruption, which many South Africans experience when trying to engage with local services, example, Home Affairs and the police?" Great question. Thanks, Jordan. I think let's start there, and then I'll read out some of the other questions that have come through. I'm not sure who wants to tackle that one between Prof and Debza. Prof, you're on mute, by the way. I can see you're speaking, but you haven't unmuted yourself.
I think Tebogo should answer that question because I have a conflict of interest because that's my daughter who's asking the question. So Tebogo, have a go and then I'll maybe respond.
All good, Prof. All good. So corruption. At Rise Mzansi, we say corruption is a crime against the people. Because what it does is that it takes away what is meant to be a large-scale, impactful program away from society. The skimming and the taking away of money from where it's supposed to go is a felt experience every single day. People think that's a victimless crime. It's not. When you go to communities and you see how their lives are impacted by not having facilities and resources, you start to see the impact of corruption. So that's the first. How do we plan to deal with it? We need new leaders. You see, politics is a people's sport. It is about who you choose to put in those roles that determines how government is run. And our biggest problem is not as much in the bureaucrats and technocrats of South Africa. Actually, we've got some of the most amazing professionals who are running and working in some of these departments. Where we've got a major problem is our political leadership structures and their inability to be competent, to be capable, and to be incorrupt. And so there's three things that we have proposed. Number one, there's a very toxic relationship between procurement and lifestyle. Government contracts are not about servicing people. They're about how much and how quickly people can get proximity to the purse in order to line their lives in order to live a certain lifestyle. People don't steal money from the government to go and invest it on the stock markets. They steal money from the government in order to buy champagne, to smoke cigars, to buy cars, and to live a lifestyle of pompous and gratitude. And that's the first thing that we must do is deal with the procurement systems of South Africa. And there's a number of different things that must be done, all the way from making it transparent to making certain aspects of it digital, but most importantly, making those who manage supply chain and those who are in the political structures very responsible for the monies that they manage. Number two is we must have a very clear relationship between party and state. At the moment, what has happened is that political actors and political principals have got a say in terms of how monies are dispersed and in terms of how executive functions are then executed, which is highly problematic. You've got boards of companies, of state-owned enterprises having to account to political officers in terms of who to hire, why they should hire those people, and how that then is an exchange of patronage. And we've seen this with Eskom, and that's why we've got so many of our state-owned enterprises being run by people in acting roles and the consequences of what happens when people are not held accountable. The third thing that we must deal with insofar as corruption is concerned is the micro-corruption. Actually, in all the communities that we go to, they don't talk about Eskom and Transnet and SABC. They talk about sex for jobs, they talk about cash for jobs, they talk about nepotism, and they talk about just how impossible it is to be able to get services or an opportunity if you're not a card-carrying member of the ANC or if you don't know someone in those departments. And so we must be able to deal with micro-corruption by making, for example, those who propose and push sex for jobs and cash for jobs, make it a criminal offense and make sure those people get arrested and get dealt with. But we must also make sure that we separate the lines between municipal officers that are executive in their roles and those who are political officers so that they don't tamper with the process of procurement and the process of recruitment. So those are some of the fundamental things. But the last thing that I will add is, as a culture for South Africans, we must start to get rid of corruption as a getaway or as a get out of jail card. Yes, the private sector in some instances is responsible for soliciting certain favors in order for their businesses to succeed. And yes, the public sector is complicit. But there's also another side, which is we've got community members like you and I who propose and promote corruption by giving cool drink money on the side of the road when we get stopped or when we get given a fine or we want to get ahead to be able to get a visa application. That culture gets extended when people start to see that you succeed by doing these other things. They start to also incorporate that behavior. And so we are all responsible for rooting out corruption from wherever we are. And so that's what we must do. Rise Mzansi must be the rising tide that lifts all ships. And that's why we say Rise Mzansi must be the new moral, intellectual, and political, which means that we must all hold ourselves to a much higher standard and make sure that we don't take the short route. Thank you.
Maybe I can just add, Dimpo, to say where Tebogo started is absolutely right. The leaders set the tone. That's why I was mentioning the case of Jacob Zuma within the ANC's own disciplinary process. Those kinds of things set such a terrible example. I popped into the municipal court the other day just to see, because I mentioned in the law, the criminal justice system as a whole chain of events, starting with the SAPS, then with the justice, and then with the correctional services. And I spent just an hour, I popped into 2 different trials. In the one trial that I was watching, it was the 5th time they'd convened, taking our time and money to prosecute someone where the docket had been taken or files were missing. You can't do that. The administrative system has to be repaired. And I'll just add to what Tebogo's outlined by saying you have to have a capable administrative state. And at the moment, you have this disconnect between the national, provincial, and the local, but you have as bad a disconnect within the system and all the different ministries that are meant to play a role in making our lives safe and secure. And like all of the Rise campaigners, I've spent time in the worst conditions where people do not see the chance of security. I was in Manenberg where the goggles all said the same thing, the grannies all said the same thing. When the sun goes down, you lock your door and you do not go out of your house until the sun's up, and you will hear 10 to 15 gunshots every night. Now, we've lost control of some of these areas, and it's going to be a hard job to get them back. We have to decontaminate the SAPs. I'm not talking just about fines and cokes along the way. Many SAPS members do a brilliant job, but unfortunately there's a minority that are part of this criminal system. And so it's going to take an incredible effort to find people who've got the guts to go into investigative prosecutions and make sure we bring people to bear. The Zuma matter, some of it's gone on for 18 years. This is not justice. Justice delayed is justice denied. And we've got a massive prison population. A lot of this is just because of bad admin and or corruption. So it's going to take a long time to fix it. And we're going to, it's no good promising you that we're going to do this in the short time that comes from this election. This is a multi-decade struggle. Many countries have this problem. We're not alone. But in South Africa, it's got a particular consequence in government. It breaks down morale of all the good people in the system. Whistleblowers do not have adequate protection. And so people are reluctant to put their hands up. I've talked to many of them. So it's a long, long fight about crime. Let me end there.
Thanks, Debza and Prof. Nick. And, speaking about the administrative gaps that make it difficult for things to just function in government, it's crazy to think about how I come from a generation where I don't know if I've seen things work. I come from a generation where registering for school, whether it's primary, high school, or tertiary education, is a struggle for a lot of marginalized people. Getting proper healthcare is a struggle, where if you're going to be seen at all at the clinic, you need to be there by 3 a.m., 4 a.m., or else you're not going to get any kind of medical attention. A generation where things like the system being offline at Home Affairs is actually a joke. We joke about it on social media, but it's actually quite demoralizing, like you're saying, Prof, to think about the fact that some of us can't even imagine what a capable administrative state would actually look like. But back to some of the comments that we've been getting from our various platforms. Sangla says, my train ticket from Manchester is sorted. I'll be voting in London. Mandla Mutlawung. So there's two questions, and I'm going to ask both of them, but I'm going to address the first one to you, Prof, and then the second one to you, Debza. And just before I forget now, I've remembered that Sangla says he's going to London. We are going to be having a braai in Edinburgh. Our RM Global lead volunteer, Sindiso, is going to be hosting a braai where you're able to get a Burvos roll. That's happening on the 10th of May. Please do visit our social media platforms so you can get the information and the details around the venue and the time. And we are also planning on having an in-person engagement in London. I'm just not sure if we have the details locked down yet, but please keep watch on our socials as well. And if you can, please do join our WhatsApp group, because that's where we share all the daily updates with our global community. So for you, Prof, from Mandla, who's asking about the economy and jobs. And he says, every party speaks about how small businesses are a catalyst for growing the economy and creating jobs. What is Rise Mzansi's approach to small business development and the township economy in particular? And then for you, Debza, Arno van Hart, hope I'm saying that correctly. He says, we know that not everything can be fixed overnight. It certainly was not broken overnight. However, the hurt and anxiety is happening now. How do we keep the energy up, the energy for change? How do we make sure we don't fall into despair?
So let me tackle the first one. And thanks for that question. It's an absolutely critical question. Let me ask you a question. What % of Japanese economy is produced by companies of less than 50 people? We all think of Toyota and the big companies. The answer is 50%. Last year, I went to the Philippines and drove around a lot. And every small town I came to, every second house on the main road was a business. So someone's selling fresh food, the one next door is making food, someone's got a timber merchant, the next door's a furniture person, one person's repairing motorcycles, the next one's selling them. And every small town, I'm not talking about big towns, small towns, was a hive of entrepreneurial small business. This week I was privileged to go to Malawi and drive for 300 kilometers to get to a venue and see exactly the same thing. So we've talked about small business all my professional life, and somehow we have not made it happen. It's partly to do with regulation, it's partly to do with capital, and it's partly to do with no quick fix. You start small and you work from there. Robbie Brosen built Nando's from a small Portuguese restaurant in Rosettenville. Now it's one of the top 100 brands in the world. A lot of entrepreneurs want to start too big. It's starting small and meeting an unmet need. And we've got to clear the regulatory environment, and we've got to provide capital. We have the capitals. I'll give you one example. The capital is the IDC, the Industrial Development Corporation, has billions and billions of rands on its portfolio, but it invests in big companies. And the ministry that was created 3 or 4 years ago has been so badly funded and badly run that it hasn't done this. But small business, really, in my view, comes from people's energy and determination. Every big business was once one person with an idea. And we've got to encourage that mindset, because ultimately the government cannot provide the economic means to live. The only place that we'll find that is through working, and the two ways of working are working for someone or working for yourself. And as we go through this economic revolution, so much has been opened up. In townships, of course, we need to make a triple investment, because we've got to get the education system right and the infrastructure right to be able to attract the kind of personalities that are just going to put their heads down and say, it doesn't matter what I'm doing, but I'm going to run a call center, or I'm going to run a service provider in the IT space, or I'm going to run a beauty. It doesn't matter what it is, but unless we build that underpinning to the economy, I can't see how the 25 million South Africans that depend on a social grant will ever be released from the indignity of that. Nobody that I know wants to live on a social grant. There may be some young people who can have a crazy lifestyle, but the majority of people, they want to work. They want to apply their skills as decent, dignified people with self-worth. And a lot of that will come from small business. As I think you all know, at the moment, corporate South Africa is not investing. It's got a huge amount of money ready to invest, but it's not investing. Why? It lacks the confidence. It's watching the infrastructure decline. Today's headlines are all about Shell withdrawing from South Africa. We'll see where that goes. But, I mean, that would be a catastrophe for South Africa. South Africa stands out in this continent because of big businesses, big service providers, whether it's Amazon or Takealot, doesn't matter. One is local, one is global. This is the lifeblood of economic development. You want to keep big companies, the Standard Banks and the Nedbanks, but we've got to get the next generation of Nando's started up. Thanks so much, Dimple.
Thanks, Prof. And on the question around, the energy to sustain change and to shift us out of despair, I always go back to very visceral examples of when do we remember that happening. The Rugby World Cups, both of them that we won, are such a perfect example of what happens when South Africans are led and when they galvanize themselves behind something that they believe in. And many people will talk about, rugby and what it means to different racial groups and so on. Forget about that for a second. Think about what it meant when Rassie Erasmus and Siya Kolisi were together with the Springboks to drive this country to become the world champions, and what that feeling was like. South Africans at that moment understood and were reminded of what a winning culture is. We are inherently a winning people, but because we haven't had the leadership that allows us to access that potential and allows us to unlock that part of ourselves, we've just forgotten what it means to be a winning population. And so I think the new leaders that we are asking to come into the space are going to do exactly that. They come with experience, but they come with the understanding of what does it mean to win, and what does it mean to take people along with you and make sure that everybody belongs and they play their part in making sure that we win. And so I think that's an anecdote, but not even just rugby. You look at all sporting codes. Recently, Bafana Bafana played the AFCON, and for decades, Bafana Bafana was not a thing to be considered. In this recent AFCON, we sold more soccer jerseys than we have since 1998. And that is because Bafana Bafana showed us something that we had not seen in a very long time, which is that you don't have to win the tournament, but you definitely have to show us that you want this and that you want to win and that you want to fight for your country and that you want to prepare and do the very best for your people. And I think that's really it. We must, in all of us, in all of our spaces, they say that culture is the collective behavior of a people. We must expect to win and we must expect to compete, but do so in a very humane and an Ubuntu way in every space that we occupy. But we have to see that from somewhere. We have to learn it from somewhere, and we have to lend that energy from somewhere. It's not going to come out of nothingness. There's just too many people who've lost too much too often, and we have to get them to understand and see what it feels like to win. And so there are small wins and small milestones that we can do every so while to try and remind people of who we are as a collective. And that's why I spoke about a united South Africa, a safe, prosperous, equal, and united. The united is about shared experiences. How do I get you to see my world, and how do I step into your world? And then how do we make sure as a people those shared experiences start to mean something in moving towards a specific purpose and a vision? We need direction, we need a plan, we need leadership, we need values, and we need an example. And I think Rise Mzansi does have a platform and people to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Debza. And speaking of shared experiences meaning something, I'm looking at the screen and I have FOMO because you and Prof. Nick, we can clearly see that you're wearing Rise t-shirts, but when I look at myself, it's just black. So I just want to rise so everyone can see that I'm also wearing, there we go. I'm also wearing Rise merchandise. And to our supporters who are living abroad, but who would like to sponsor some Rise merchandise or even purchase some things for their family members, our online store is live. So you are able to go onto our website and shop for Rise Mzansi merch that can be delivered locally. Thank you so much to the both of you for joining us on this very, very, I think, important session, being able to connect with South Africans who are living abroad, but as we mentioned, who share the same vision for South Africa as Rise Mzansi. I'm going to ask my last two questions, and in answering them, I'm going to ask the both of you to please weave in your closing remarks and just a final call to action to some people who are maybe not sure if they're actually going to show up on the 18th during the elections, why they need to show up and vote and continue to fight, as Debza was saying, for this country, because we can be a winning nation. We are a winning nation, but it requires participation from each and every one of us. Dawan Pillay, once again, I hope I'm saying that correctly, says, thank you for this virtual event and for the deep reflections. I will be voting in The Hague, one of my favorite cities in the world. See you on the 18th. But my final questions before we leave to you, Debza, is how can people who are in the global community volunteer? Volunteer at Rise Mzansi. So how can they get involved, volunteer their time, their skills, etc., to help us build this movement and this organization? And then to you, Prof. Nick, it's around just the importance. I would like for you to just one more time emphasize the importance for South Africans who are overseas to still participate and still be, I guess, alive to what is happening within our country's political landscape.
Thank you, Dimpo, and thank you for the questions. Let me wrap it up in this way. Let me start with the how can we volunteer, and then I'll move to the close. Volunteerism is not an activity; it is a culture and an attitude, which means on every given opportunity and day, the question that we must ask ourselves is, what am I doing to contribute, and what am I doing to add value? And there's so many different ways based on where you are, who you are, and what you're doing. You know, one of the things we did at Rise Mzansi is we never forced anyone to be something that they're not. We said we will meet people where they are. Some people volunteer for 1 hour in a week, some people 1 day in a week, and some people, like myself, are full-time and committed to this journey. And so I think the question is really about tapping into being self-led and being self-activated based on the ethos of how we convene. Let me tell you how we convene. There's a thing we call the power of 8. The power of 8 is the concept that you must know, at least we would like to believe, at least 8 people in your network that you can connect with that are where you are or back home here in South Africa. And so the power of 8 is, can you stay connected with those people so that you've got a group that keeps you alive, that keeps you connected to the work that we do. The power of what we live post-COVID is that we can have this conversation digitally. And so it means that our activism is a lot more meaningful using electronic and digital means. And so we encourage you to connect with our groups and our communities here. If you once lived in Gauteng, feel free to join the Gauteng group. Even though you may be part of the global community, if you come from here and you have lived here, you're still a part of this place. And we want you to be able to see some of the photos that we share, some of the stories that we share. And every once in a while, you may be like, oh, I remember that place. Maybe I can connect you with somebody who may be able to assist you with that one thing that you're looking at. So let us not let our geographical limitations disconnect us from who we in essence are. So build your power of 8 and let that be the basis and the base of how you then grow. And when those power of 8 are convened, you ask them to build their power of 8, and the compounding effect then carries through. Also, work on things that you're passionate about. All of us care about either crime and safety or education or healthcare or the economy and business. Allow yourself in the things and the spaces that you're passionate about and where you believe you can exert and impact change. The other part is we are always looking for resources. You know, the thing about democratic competitiveness is that it requires capital, whether it's intellectual capital, social capital, or financial capital. And so if we're able to fundraise and to build our resource base, we are that much more able to speak and respond to some of the opportunities and challenges that we have. These t-shirts that we wear, it's about 60 or 65 rand a pop. We've had to print over 300,000 of these t-shirts, and then the posters, and then the transport and logistics. And so this is a massive machinery that continuously needs to be resourced. So if you're able to assist us in fundraising, in building a resource base and an arsenal that can allow us to achieve some of our visions, we definitely invite you to do that. And in my parting shot, the call to action, point to everybody who's listening, is that we have 24 days to define what the next 5 years is going to look like. 24 days to define what the next 5 years looks like. The next time we get to sit in this type of process is in 2029. Now, I can ask you, what do you think happens for the next 5 years if we do not intervene in a meaningful way? Time is of the essence. The window of opportunity is now. And don't wait until we are voting. The voting day is important, but you have 24 days to do something to contribute. Activate yourself today, activate yourself tomorrow. Start getting on the phone and making some calls, sending some emails, and letting people know that we exist and that we exist to make an impactful change. Our website has got a beautiful catalog of amazing resources to let people know what we do, and our social media platforms are truly a reflection of what we do on a daily basis. Send people there so that they know how to find us and where to look for us. 24 days, 5 years. Let's make this moment count. We are the ones that we've been waiting for. We must make sure that the inflection moment of 1994 is similar to the one of 2024, so that we can take full advantage of changing this country for the next 30 years, so that it can be safe, it can be prosperous, equal, and united in our generation. Thank you.
That's so inspiring, Tebogo. Thank you for your passion and articulate description of why we're in the room on a Sunday afternoon or whatever time zone you're in. You know, I came back to South Africa. I left South Africa in early 80s. I thought this can't work out. And I lived for 4 years in America. And then I eventually realized, no matter what, I'm a South African. And I came back. And that was 1986. And if you told me in 1986, 1988, when I was an activist, that South Africa would become a constitutional democracy with one of the best constitutions in the world, that have gifted us the rights to do what we're doing, to speak out and to organize and to stand for something and oppose other things. I would not have imagined that in 1986. It's so hard to remember how difficult a period we came from. But now we're free, and we're free to make a contribution, as are you. So I want to thank you all for joining us this afternoon. I just want to add one or two practical things. I'm coming over this week, and we'll be hosting a braai in Wimbledon on Saturday, and we'll post that. And I just want to also encourage you on the social media, because this is just a few of us chatting. Take the time just to go and listen to Songezo, listen to him speak, and sharing his message. I've mentioned people like Tebogo in all the provinces. And this is a new generation with new energy. For many years now, I've said that a person, an individual, has three sets of opportunities or risks. The first is how they conduct themselves as a citizen, as an employee or entrepreneur or a worker, how you live your life, what steers your life, and how you make your life choices. The second is your work, actually, your work environment, which is where most of us live. But in South Africa at the moment, it's the third part that's at risk. That's the country itself, this place we call Mzansi, with all of its complexities and history, has so much potential. And the reason I'm mentioning coming back in 1986 is that, whether you come back or not, you inevitably will remain to the end of your days. I'm sure this is true for all of you, as South African. And that South Africanness has enriched or made your life difficult. It doesn't really matter, but it's been a part of your life. Don't let go of it. Keep that linkage going, and RISE is one way to do it. And as Tebogo says, you can be a volunteer, you can contribute a little bit of money so we can bring give T-shirts to people. All of that can be done. I'll bring some, and I'll bring some lunch bars to London. And I want to thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this. Temple, back to you.
Thank you, Prof. Nick, and you, Debza, for joining us on. Itu mentioned in the comments that there's some background noise. That's actually because Debza's in a coffee shop, because he's on his way, he's in transit, on his way to his next engagement. And I think that's just the nature of the campaign trail. So I know that you're both incredibly busy, but thank you for making the time to speak to us and to help us activate our Rise Mzansi global community. As Prof. Nick mentioned, we are going to be doing this in person because we want to meet you in person. And so we're having those two braais in Wimbledon and one in Edinburgh. I believe the one in London or in Wimbledon is taking place on the 11th. I stand to be corrected, but we will share all of the correct information on social media, on our Facebook group, as well as our WhatsApp group. And just like that, we have launched RM Global. We look forward to you engaging with us on this platform. At Rise Mzansi, we don't have one-way conversations where we just sit and present and tell you about ourselves, but we really try to activate these platforms so that we can hear from you, so that you can engage with us. So do send us messages, do send us emails if you have any suggestions, if you'd like to make contributions, so that we can connect and I guess amplify and grow the work that we're doing in that way. But that's it for me this evening. Just a slight throw forward to our fireside chats at 6:30 on Facebook, on YouTube, and on Twitter. We are getting to know our head of policy, Mandla Isaacs, and he'll be hosted by our digital campaigns manager, Gaupalelwe Phala Itzile. But that's it for this session. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone.